Hi, my name is Dr. Heidi Forbes Öste, and I am a digital well-being and ethics expert. Today, we will be talking about how the human relationship with technology is impacting your ability to lead and to thrive. Look forward to sharing this show with you. See you soon.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron, founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness so you can reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. Today, we're going to be taking an insider look at your digital self. And can IT live in harmony with your most human self? Remember, you can now go and chat about this show or this episode or any of the episodes on Facebook in our Facebook group, Dov Baron Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. Remember, you can also find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, we always need your help in staying relevant. So please get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. When you do so, please let us know by going to that Facebook page, Leadership and Loyalty Podcast, on Facebook, and tell us that you've given us a review, and we will give you a shout out right here on the show. You can also catch us on traditional radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday, all the way from Philadelphia to Colorado Springs. If you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We're deeply grateful for that. And with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show, we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. You can also find us on Google Home and Alexa. Simply say, play Dov Baron Podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, C-suite leader, sales leader, entrepreneur, leader in any capacity, you know that we are living in a digital era. Technology is pervasive in every area of our lives. It's there when we go to work. It's how we work. And now it's even how we date. As leaders and entrepreneurs, tech anxiety and poor habits around technology can make the difference between struggling to make ends meet with no free time and having a business that feeds the desired lifestyle and the very soul of who you are. The question is, can we create a healthy integration of human development and achieve digital mastery that allows us to thrive? Well, stay tuned because you're about to find out. Our guest today is Dr. Heidi Öste. No, Öste, not Esther. Sorry, Öste. Dr. Heidi Öste is a behavioral scientist, best-selling author, podcast host, international keynote speaker, digital well-being strategist. She combines 25 years experience in social technology and social strategy for organizations with her scholarly research in Presenteeism, that is a new word for me, user experience design and wearable development. As a digital well-being evangelist, she is passionate about supporting our transition into the digital era without losing our humanity in the process. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Dr. Heidi Forbes Öste. Welcome.
Thank you. What a nice introduction. Great to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. And just so everybody understands that you and I met back in April, wasn't it? I think April when we met. We were
Exactly.
both media icons.
Yes.
That was, you know, I remember sitting down, you and I sat and had a breakfast together, and it was really interesting because this lovely combination, which for you is behind behavioral science and then also this technology. And that's why, you know, I had lots of people talk to me about wanting to do a show around digital technology. We've done some stuff, but This is it's a lovely combination. So let's start here with, because you're cited as a digital well-being evangelist. What is that? Tell our viewers, our listeners, what that is.
Well, as you mentioned before, I mean, technology is becoming pervasive in our lives. And so there's a lot of different aspects. One is, how do we balance that technology so that it supports our lives and supports our ability to thrive? But also, how do we use different tools that are designed specifically for well-being, and particularly thinking about wearables and wellness technologies to really improve and enhance our ability to thrive. So it's not just about developing these ecosystems of technology that support our ability to thrive, but also looking at the tools that can take us up a notch. And the other side is also, I do a lot of advising with companies that are developing the technologies to look at how we can create technologies that are complementary to our way of being, rather than expecting us to change the way that we are. But also looking at the ethics of using behavior science when we're developing technologies to make people use the technologies more effectively.
And I want to get into something you just said there in a little while, because people are very concerned about digital technology for all kinds of reasons. And, one of the simple ways that people are concerned is that it seems like in many ways, like I remember, I'm an old guy, but I can remember being at school and being, one of the guys getting in trouble for using a calculator, and it seems like today in many ways, our smartphones are making us dumber. We do calculations on the phone. We don't do anything in our head. We don't know how to do these things. There's, on top of that, there's digital addictions. We can't put our phone down. We're always looking for that next dopamine hit that comes from a like on Facebook, or, somebody liked your Instagram image. Talk to us a little bit about that, particularly because that's what I said about this combination for you.
Well, so, I mean, to break it down into something that people can relate to, technology and change is hard. Even when the automobile came, all of a sudden people were, going these great distances, and in the extreme, you have people in California who drive down to their mailbox. Okay, so they're not moving, they're not walking enough, and so there's this, oh my gosh, this technology is changing the way that we live, and yet now we can go much greater distances, and we can do different things that we couldn't. We can carry things with us that we couldn't carry with us before. The technology that we're looking at today, the internet-based technology, allows us to do something similar, in that we're able to go greater distances, have a wider reach, and we're able to also connect with more things, bring them to us that we couldn't do before. And so when you're talking about, for example, a calculator, my father was one of those who was resistant, and when I had to have a calculator in school, gave me a slide rule. And I said, well, he said, well, this is perfectly fine for me. And of course, my teacher laughed at me when I brought it in and said, I think we need the calculator. So my mother was nice enough to oblige. But now we're able to actually do so much more in terms of more expansive calculations that we never would have had the capacity to do. You would have had to be a mathematician in order to accomplish a lot of the things that now a calculator can do for you.
Sure.
So technology technology is only supporting that change. It's not necessarily creating that change. And so part of it is getting comfortable with change, but the other part is also learning better behaviors around it. And that's the piece that I really work with, is getting over the fear of change, and also developing better behaviors around how we change and how we integrate these technologies into our lives and to our workflows. So, yeah.
I mean, I agree with you. There's no doubt about it that human beings are resistant to the very thing they cannot do anything about, which is change. Change is going to happen. That's all there is to it. And you can be a Luddite about it. You can be pissed off and want to smash things. But the bottom line is change is coming whether you like it or not. But it's I don't think it's about managing the change. It's about managing ourselves in the change. And that's what I'm saying about, the addiction to the dopamine hit, or, those kinds of things. are concerning, particularly when we look at the science and the behavioral science and the neuroscience around multitasking and how bad that is, and how we all think we're multitaskers and none of us are really, in the effective manner. So, it's help us, because, we're leaders, we're entrepreneurs, we're all those kinds of things. And we carry around these computers in our pockets that are demanding our attention at every possible turn. And, in many ways, a lot of our business exists right in our hand here that didn't exist even 10 years ago. So we're carrying our business around. How do we, because it's a drug. Simple, it's a drug, right? How do we get ourselves to, it's not like, well, I'll just have a little bit of heroin, I'll just have heroin at 9 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. It's not quite like that, but in many ways, the addiction process that comes with these digital devices. Help us out a little bit around grasping that.
So a lot of it is building more conscious behaviors around it. So as I mentioned, sort of building awareness about how we are using them and how we are overusing, or in some cases underusing them. So as part of what I do is help map out our technical ecosystem of how we're using the technologies and help them journal and track their usage, so that this is more on an individual scale, but tracking your usage and understanding how and where you're really getting your high value actions completed in, using technology, and where things are actually just wasted time and wasted space. And so some of that, that we automatically assume is wasted time, wasted space, isn't always. So I'll give you the example that everybody's familiar with, watching, animal videos, right? So it's one of those things that goes into your Facebook feed. People send you them. You don't have to be on Facebook to see them. They're sort of pervasive. Well, and they're kind of, you just can't resist. It's like, I'm going to watch this. Well, actually, that also gives you a different kind of serotonin rush. And it actually can also stimulate your oxytocin, because it's sort of a warm, cozy feeling of like, oh, I love animals. So a certain amount of that is actually very productive and good for you. But if you're watching a couple hours of that a day, then you're on the excessive side. And that's not necessarily just for that rush. There, you're just getting sucked in. Same thing with news. I mean, unless you're a journalist and your job is to be researching the news all the time, I think, the news junkie scenario is very common, where it's like, you're constantly getting that feed of another thing has happened or something else is going on. So I've got to read it, whether it's the sports scores or whether it's international news.
Tweets.
Exactly. So how much of that do you actually need to be tracking? And so it's more about tracking our own behaviors than actually tracking the news and being more conscious about it. So one of the first steps that I do with a lot of my clients is teaching them how to journal and actually, keep a tracking mechanism of how they're using technology and how they're everything from the physical technology to the feeds. And that's also what's triggering you to have negative responses. So, for example, not taking care of your notifications or your email can have really negative impact on your well-being. And, you think of it as being, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. But when you open up your inbox and it says you've got 3,000 unread messages, and it's simply because you've scanned over all of the junk mail and not bothered to delete it, it still can cause a physiological and neurological response that puts you in a different place when you're actually going at the other work. So it's about being much more aware of how you are using the technologies, but also sort of your general routines and behaviors around it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I just want to go a little bit deeper into that for a moment before we move on. But, there's when it comes to technology, there's also quite a bit of fear. Again, part of the Luddite mentality, but there's fear. And some of that fear is coming from people who are, generally speaking, not fearful people. They are forward thinking. I mean, like Elon Musk, he's famously quoted as saying artificial intelligence is the biggest existential threat to humanity. AI is, of course, people have no idea how pervasive AI already is. When you're in a chat room or chat box on a website and you think you're talking to Susie or to Bob, you're probably talking to AI. That AI is responding to a lot of the things that we used to hire somebody from India for. So what do you say to that fear, around AI as an example, with your background, of course?
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember not to generalize and to take statements like that out of context. So, I mean, as you said, like AI is already very pervasive, and yet all of these technologies are really in their infancy. And
Yes.
so we look at it as like, oh my God, everything's changing and this is the way it is going forward. It's like, when we first got mobile phones, it wasn't that long ago, and just mobile phones, right?
Yeah.
Not even smartphones.
No.
And they changed the way that we did things. And, people were fearful then. And then the smartphone, even more so. It's like, what is this thing? It's doing all these crazy things. So that fear of change is a natural response. Now, that's not to say that in the wrong hands, these things can't be evil, but it's not the technology that's evil. It's the people that are behind them. So that's something that's really important to recognize. And with anything, the technology itself is not the evil part. And there's definitely going to be bad people everywhere, right?
But that's the caution for people is that even though people can recognize, of course, the technology is not evil, that it's actually neutral and maybe even beneficial. But at the same time, people are pissed off at Facebook or Mark Zuckerberg because of what happened with infiltration from Russia or, those kinds of things. And that's not saying Zuckerberg is evil. I'm just saying, the technology can be used that way. And I think that in and of itself makes people fearful of the technology because they say, well, AI is gathering my information. So I don't want to go online. I don't want to be part of the system in any way, shape or form. And I get it. I understand it. And I'm a great believer in moving forward and changing all those things. I'm just wondering how you, with that knowledge that you have, which is far superior to most people around technology and a superior knowledge around human behavior, what's your sort of guidance for those people who are saying, I like the idea of the technology. I want the technology, but I'm concerned about privacy. I'm concerned about infiltration from bad guys using good technology.
So I think it's actually a really good point. And I think what's important to recognize is that fear isn't necessarily always a bad thing.
No, of course not.
So fear actually there's a reason behind that response. And so if anything, that fear actually gets us to be aware that we're having an emotional response to something that's external. And so the work that I do is really about building that consciousness of what those triggers are, and then to dig a little deeper to understand what it is that we're fearful of, what is actually causing that response, and then actually figuring out what can we do to minimize that response, but also take care of that thing that's causing the fear. So whether it's in the case of feeling fearful about privacy and security, well, maybe your systems aren't very well set up so that you do have privacy and security, because it is an issue, quite frankly. It's not something that, you don't want to be throwing your social security number around on internet, or sharing your credit card number on a non-secure site, or on those very basic levels. So it is important to actually have not necessarily a level of fear, but a level of an awareness and caution. So I think that the fear is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as we recognize what is behind the fear. What is it that we're fearful of? And how can we actually minimize that physiological response by also creating better boundaries and better platforms that remove those risks. So whether it's if you switch over to an Apple ecosystem, which is a little more secure, or whether you get more security software built into your other systems, it doesn't matter. What's important is to recognize what your ecosystem is and how to protect it.
Right. Now, your digital mastery books, the subtitles are How to Master Your Relationship with Technology and Amplify Productivity, and Connection in a Digital Era, and then conquer your digital habits and boost your relationship and business growth. They are, again, talking to those two sides. So talk to us a little bit more about the books and what is the message there? What are you trying to get us to grasp?
So again, it's about building a more conscious relationship with technology and sort of recognizing where your relationship is impacting your behaviors that impact your business and your relationships. So it's looking at where all those connections occur and how can you actually put them in a better state of flow. And part of that is actually eliminating excess. So if you're familiar with like a digital or an elimination diet where you like get rid of absolutely everything that's non-essential, and then you slowly add things in to identify what things are toxic or creating allergic responses. We do the same thing with technology, where you go back to the absolute basic, that because you know, in this day and age, you can't completely lock yourself in a room and do nothing and still run a business. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
So you go down to the absolute basic, and then you slowly add things back in to identify where the toxic relationships are, where the toxicity is occurring, so that you can minimize that as much as possible and improve your flows. The other thing is also just recognizing sort of how your ecosystem has evolved. Again, we're in the infancy stage here. So there's the tendency to just keep on accumulating different types of softwares, different types of applications. Whenever the new latest, greatest thing comes along, we forget to remove the thing that's actually got that same functionality. And so we end up with a lot of duplication. We end up with a lot of redundancies, and we end up with a lot of things that maybe don't communicate well with each other. So it's not just about our relationship with the technology, but it's about the technology and how it relates to each other. And also, who are you connecting with? So if you've got an online business, or you've got a business, a business that does part of its business over technology, which most do today, what is your client using? What are your distributors using? And so understanding their ecosystem and also their relationship with technology is just as important. And particularly for the smaller entrepreneur that's delivering programs and products online, if they don't understand the relationship and the ecosystem of their consumers, they may be completely missing out on their market. So it's really important to not just look at our own relationship and our own ecosystems and where the fluidity is there, but also down the whole distribution chain.
So how did you get into this? Because, the digital world at a generalized level is pretty new. I know there's been specialists in it and people have been around in it and fiddling around with it for more than 50 years. But in the context of, in the world, it's fairly new. And I think people tend to forget that. We have a generation already that has never been without it. But there's also two generations that never grew up with it at all, right? That are still here, maybe even three generations, depending on age. So, how did you sort of drift into that world?
So I was a very early adopter. I was, playing with Mac IIe in high school in the early 80s or mid 80s. And so I liked playing with these things at an early stage, but for me, I was very into the social aspect of how do we use these technologies to connect. So when we were playing with the early programming, I was making banners, that had, remember the old dot matrix banners where you could print letters and sort of, write happy birthday or something like that. So for me, it's always been about how do we use technology to connect people better? And that really moved me into a space where I was teaching technology and I was teaching about social technologies. I worked with a think tank in education technology for a while, and then actually did some advising for the European community on the future of the internet, which moved me more into advising companies on the internet strategy. And for me, it was all about where are we going with this stuff and how can we connect people to the things and the people that they need going forward. So I worked in that for 25 years, but I just found that it was missing a component for me of understanding the behavior science behind it and what is this relationship with technology and how do we quantify what's happening there, because it was just a constant learning curve where every time I came into a company, I spent most of my time just helping them understand what these tools were rather than helping them understand the potential, because most people aren't systems thinkers. They're more like, get the task done, teach me how to do it, and then I'll just go do it. I understand I have to do it, but I don't understand why. I'm just going to do it. And so when you're a systems thinker, it can be very frustrating to get non-systems thinkers to get, to really understand what you're doing. So I went back and did my PhD to understand the human relationship with technology and the connection between. My dissertation research was actually on wearable technologies and presence of mind in the workplace. So how do we use these technologies to make us more present? And that's where the presenteeism is. It's basically you're physically there but checked out is presenteeism.
Right.
So versus absenteeism where you're checked out but you don't come in. But presenteeism is actually a much bigger problem. You have more people that
nothing else.
Exactly. You physically show up, but you're checked out.
The Gallup poll shows that more than 70% of the workforce is not there.
That's presenteeism.
There. You're paying them, but they ain't there. They're somewhere else altogether.
And that is costing companies billions. It's a huge, huge problem. And it's not just, it used to be presenteeism was identified as health-related issues. Now I expanded the work around presenteeism to include consciousness-based presenteeism, where you're sort of working unconsciously, and the other piece of distraction-based, which is another huge issue. You've got multitasking, you've got your cell phone going, you've got your screen over here, someone's having a conversation with you. You're not really 100% on any of those things. So presenteeism is a big issue, and technology is definitely a contributing factor, but if used correctly, can actually support it. So that was my research work, but a lot of what came out of that was the fact that most of the technologies are not designed to integrate in the human experience. So ultimately, we want to develop technologies that you don't even notice are there. Right? They're just working. Mm-hmm. Right? And there's very few that I think have achieved that well. For me, and this is my premise on everything technology, is that the anomaly is the norm. So for each individual, what's optimal for them is different, right? But for me, I work in an Apple ecosystem. So my Apple Watch is just part of my day. I don't even think about it, but it's there. It's tracking my heart rate. It's tracking my activity. It's reminding me when I need to be places. If I forgot my phone, I can find my phone. I mean, I had this crazy experience coming back from a conference recently where my phone fell out of my pocket in the lift on my way to the airport. And I get to the airport and I'm like, my boarding pass, everything is gone.
On your phone,
right? But I had my watch on, which has a phone signal that's the same as my phone, and my laptop. So I was able to find my phone from my laptop, send a message on my phone if someone, to ping it, and then have a message saying, call this number, call my number. It will ring, but it'll ring through my watch. Now, I'm at the airport, and my driver called me back and was back in 15 minutes, right? So that's not something I would have thought about preparing for.
No.
But because my ecosystem was fluid, it saved my butt, right?
Where are we going, Heidi? Where are we going from your perspective? What you see in this healthy. Let's suggest that we can actually move into a healthy digital well-being balance between technology and humanity. Where do you hope we're going with that?
I actually see incredible promise in the future. And, I think big data is one of those things that's really scary for people. But part of, you see big data working really well in certain ecosystems where it's already become fairly fluid. We spent many years living in Sweden. I'm a Swedish citizen. My husband's Swedish, born in Sweden. There you have, so every individual has a person number, right? And so when you go to the doctor, you go in there and they've got your entire health record from, every prescription you've ever had, every doctor's appointment you've ever had. They know what's going on. Now, that's big data in action, where they know how to treat you because they know what's been going on with your life, right? In terms of your medical history.
Right.
When we get to a place where big data works for you in that way and technology can support you in that way. So say, for example, if my watch is feeding that data to my doctor so that when he asks me how I'm doing and I'm not able to answer that properly, he can actually pull up what's going on, what my activity has been. Because when somebody says, what's your, how active have you been? Well, it depends on whether I'm regularly an active person. If I've, walked down to the store twice, that might be active for me if I'm a lazy person. But if I'm a triathlete and I've only run 10 miles that day, I might be like, well, I'm not doing much, right?
Yeah, of course, it's completely subjective.
It's totally subjective. So, we can get better treatment for our bodies and for our minds. Same with psychologically. We're starting to get much better tools to understand what's really happening inside the brain. In terms of productivity, we're really just exponentially able to actually focus in what our particular skill sets are and our expertise so that we can do what we're really good at and delegate the rest. Some of it's delegated to an AI, some of it's delegated to another person that's their expertise.
Right.
But the ability to have virtual assistants that are located on the other side of the planet that give them an opportunity to work in the global marketplace. I think that the technology and the possibility for the future is amazing. And I'm obviously an advocate, and I obviously have a very optimistic viewpoint, but I also think that for those that don't, I think that there's that fear it's just a transition point, and it's that resistance to change that it's a missed opportunity, but it's going to be there no matter what the change is, whether the change is.
Unless the grid collapses, which is still a possibility in the United States because it's so old and unmaintained, we're not going to get away from it. And the fact is that there's, as you said, it's pervasive, it's everywhere, because now, of course, there are wearables. And then on top of that, there's the Internet of Things. Your fridge is going to be part of that. Your TV is part of it. Your microwave is part of it. It's all part of it. Your clothes, your shoes, all those things are starting to become technology. And of course, if you want to go live off in the bush, you can do that. And if but the bottom line is we can't, I guess my point that I'm trying to have people grasp here is you can't get away from technology. You can't get away from change. It's going to happen. But what you're putting forward is that we have a personal responsibility to managing that so that we can be healthy in our behaviors and how we are, and particularly in the context of relationships and connection with other human beings. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I would add also that there's this wonderful piece of recognizing the value of elders and the wisdom of elders. Now, we all assume that elders are not connected. Well, believe you me, they're far more connected than we think they are. And
they're
they have
the fastest growing group on Facebook, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they are just an enormous amount of wisdom and learning that we can harness from them, and to engage them we're able to not only increase their longevity and stimulate their ability to thrive, because one of the biggest problem for the aging population is loneliness, and also not being expected to think. I remember when my mother retired, the first thing she said was, nobody cares what I say anymore. And now all of a sudden she's an advisor in all these different organizations, and she doesn't have to do it very often. She picks and chooses, but it keeps her stimulated and active. And I think that the opportunities there to connect the generations and to connect the whole populations, and to help us get a better understanding, whether it's across generations or across borders, to really understand that we're all more alike than we are different, but we each have something unique to offer. And I think that's something that is really powerful, that's coming forward more and more through technology and the use of technology, whether it's using things like Facebook, or whether it's just connecting through. I know a lot of elders that are actually using things like Fitbit, and then they're competing with each other. Yeah. So that's not Facebook, but they're competing to stay active. They're competing to stay more connected with the world. And that's a good thing.
That's a great thing. However, you did bring up something that is a huge challenge, and that is loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
We now know that loneliness is more likely to kill you than cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's one of the things I've talked about many times on this show, is that we have got more connective devices and we're less connected than we've ever been. I mean, people, people go into restaurants and they have their phone on the table and it buzzes, and we look down and you've just interrupted this connection. And so we turn it around, but we still see it flash, or we still feel it buzz, and it's a distraction. I'm guilty of it. I own it. That it happens. And instead of putting the freaking thing away. And so what happens is that this disconnect between us, even when we're in front of each other. There's a story in my last book, Fiercely Loyal, where I talk about, sitting in a restaurant, looking over a table of 4 people, and you think, oh, maybe they're Christian or something, because their heads are down and it looks like maybe they're praying before dinner. And you realize then they're all looking at their freaking phones, right? And it's got nothing to do with anything else. And I said in the book, I said, well, you know, they're busy on their phone telling people who are not at dinner about dinner, and actually probably even saying how boring the people are they're sitting with, and they wish they were with those people. But if they were with those people, they'd be on their phones with somebody else. I mean, you know, this is part of the challenge, again, of this, so many pulls at us that we're not actually connecting and being present. I mean, you know this. You've had these conversations where you're talking to somebody, and you can tell, even on Skype or on Zoom or whatever it is, they're checking their freaking email. You can see that they just went to a website, and you're like, dude, am I here? Hello? Right? So this is a huge challenge.
Well, and the interesting thing about this particular challenge is, I think the Generation X are the worst offenders. And this is partially because it's still a novel thing for us. So we're like, wow, I can get any answer as quick as I want. And, you know, I'm like, we're just going to keep doing this. Whereas you look at this new generation, Generation Z, and they're starting to institute behaviors and techniques where, you know, they go out to dinner and they all put the phone on the table. And, if anybody grabs their phone in the middle without a valid excuse, they pay the bill. Or, you know, I mean, if they're college students, they pay for the next beer, whatever it is. But they're building in these behaviors because they're recognizing that, you know, that phubbing, it actually has a word. When you're sitting there with someone physically and you're on the phone and you're basically ignoring them, but you're physically together, that's called phubbing, P-H-U-B. And Generation X is the worst. Millennials sort of do this. It sort of depends on the group, but this is something that I think, again, we're in the infancy. There's a lot of novelty. It's like those the people that first got the car and they're like, I'm going to drive to the mailbox. And then now you have this new generation who's like, don't drive to the mailbox. You need to go for a run. So we're seeing this big switch where there's a more conscious behavior around the use of technology. So I think a lot of it is watching this. We're in the middle of this space where it's all so novel because the change is very rapid. But I work in a tech space. I know you're surrounded by technology in your work as well. It's easy for us to sit in this bubble and say everybody behaves this way. But when you go to the middle of America, or you go to France, to rural France, you're going to see a totally different behavior where they have a phone, but maybe they can't even keep track of it because they're not really using it that much. I mean, they know what the functionality, but we're seeing when you base it only on the high tech use community, then it's very easy to say, oh, everybody is just facing their phones, when in actuality that's a section of the population.
Let's talk a little bit about you, because my experience is that leaders, and you're a leader in your field, leaders are we are nudged into place, I like to say, in that we sort of choose a path, and we're very good at going, this is where I'm going and this is what I'm doing, but we're also sort of nudged a little bit along the way. And sometimes rather rudely, in my case, falling off a mountain, getting smashed to pieces, a little bit more than a nudge, but more of for those of us who are a bit thick, it takes a bit more serious nudge. What was a turning point in your life, in your leadership, in your business philosophy?
Gosh, there's been several, but I'll give you my most recent, which was while I was finishing up my PhD. I got Lyme disease.
Wow.
And I was basically couch or bedridden. I mean, I made it to the couch, basically couch ridden for 6 to 8 months, depending on, I mean, the last 3 I was physically there, but anyway, but the point is it really changed my view on rest and the importance of taking care of my own well-being. And I think a lot of leaders are starting to recognize that because burnout rates are so high. And I was, one of those sort of hyper productive people that, I'd be like, oh, I really feel like I'm not doing that much. And I'd get all this feedback from around me of like, are you kidding? No, it's like you've got like so many balls in the air and you're like hitting all these marks and, you finish a PhD and you're running your business. And I'm like, yeah, but I didn't do it fast enough. I mean, I finished my PhD at 3.5 years with Lyme disease.
Jesus.
And so I think what that experience really did for me is make me much more aware, not just aware, but learn the tools to institute rest and self-care into my whole system. And so, for example, it's getting those systems in place. So I just spent the last 6 weeks, part of it in France and part of it, with my family on Cape Cod. I opened my laptop 5 times. Because before that, I was in a frenetic pace, pre-recording everything so that it would keep on running before, while I was gone, and I was reachable via my smartphone, but whatever, to make quick edits. But the important part was I knew that I needed that rest. I knew that I needed that time to just sort of do the big shift that I needed in order to take my business to the next level. And I had a couple of meetings during that time with one of my big clients in France. And, so it wasn't all downtime, but that meeting was fully offline. It was all about face-to-face. It was about building relationships. It was about getting, agreements that we were all on the same page and understanding how we are as individuals, how we're going to work together, what is our relationship going to be going forward. And that's the type of stuff that makes the biggest difference. It's taking the time to work on relationships and really, make sure, test your systems, completely separate yourself from your systems and your work for a little while, just to see, does it work without me? Right. And what part really needs me? And I think that's a really important thing to do for leaders, to give ourselves a chance to fully rest, disconnect, to work during that time, work on relationships. And those relationships can be with your family. I mean, we work so much that we forget to take time with our family and really connect. I mean, my last day of my time off was the most precious. I went for a ride with my daughter and we rode, down, and we're still like cantering over the hills. And I was like, this is what life is all about. It's not about sitting in the podcast studio, talking to amazing people, which I love.
Sure.
But like that moment of, cantering across the hill with my daughter, my life could stop there and it would be complete.
Be good, yeah.
Right? So I think it's important that was, I think, a big shift for me of sort of getting back to my center, recognizing the part of the work that I love, and that my systems were in place to support me so that I can take that time.
So let me ask you this. What is it something that others see you do with ease that is not, or certainly was not easy for you? So, they look at it and they go, oh my God, you do that. It's so easy for you. But that it either wasn't or it actually isn't.
That's easy for me to say because I'm actually an introvert. And I speak a lot at conferences and, have to network, and people are like, oh, you're such an amazing networker. And you're out there all the time. You must be so social. I'm like, oh my God, no, I'm a total introvert. I love having one-on-one or small group conversations. The other stuff is painful for me. I mean, I can do it, but that is something that's a learned behavior. And I love networking, but I like networking like this, where I'm having a conversation with you, or, like that breakfast that we had. That to me is like, oh, that's the kind of network I love. But
it's
because of that,
it's interesting because I think so many people don't get that. So like, anybody who meets me thinks I'm an extrovert. I'm actually an extroverted introvert. I'm an introvert. My preference is, like you said, an intimate conversation. I love going to those conferences and meeting those people, but you know what? I'm actually don't give a crap about the conference and the 10,000 people. I'm actually interested in the one person or the 5 people I get to hang out with in a small intimate group. And it's like, and I speak all over the world, and people go, well, yeah, but you walk on stage, you command the stage. And I'm like, yeah, but that's trained. That's a discipline. Like I can also leg press 1,700 pounds, but I didn't go to the gym and suddenly do that. Like, there's a discipline to this. This is a muscle I had to work. And I think that's it's really good that you bring that up, because I think that there's no doubt that as leaders, we have to be out there in the world, and we've got to step up, and we've got to front up, and we are very often the face of the brand. And it may not be natural to you, but again, using technology can be extraordinarily helpful for that, right? It can be a way for us. I mean, there was an app on my phone. I can't remember what it was called now. I haven't used it in a while, but it was great because I could literally say, I'm going to be in Boston this week. And it was, it would show me everybody in Boston that I was in any way connected to, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever it might be. I was like, oh, this is so cool, because then I could and then I had my assistant set up coffee meetings, 20-minute coffee meetings. It was like, this is great. So, it's interesting, isn't it?
Well, and you say, technology is making people lonely, but I mean, I've reconnected, like you were talking about that, dropping into a city, I've reconnected with people that I knew from very early stages in my life who were special to me then, but we've been disconnected for 40 years. And we've reconnected and developed these wonderful friendships that, it's fun because you can go back into almost that childhood behavior and be silly with them, which is so important to have some silliness in your life.
Absolutely.
And I find it hard to be silly with, sort of new contacts that are sort of start out as business contacts. But there's part of me that is very silly. And I've rediscovered that in reconnecting with old friends. And that, there's something that's so beautiful in that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of silly. So tell me, what, again, I think that people look from the outside. Everybody's life is glamorous from the outside. It's one of the things I said about people is, please don't assume my life is on Facebook. Don't assume anybody else is on Facebook, including your own.
Yeah.
We don't put up the shit that's going on a day-to-day basis or the grind of what it takes.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Heidi, because I always want my listeners, my viewers to grasp from other leaders that none of us are alone. And what I mean by that is, what is it that drives you on a shitty day? On one of those days where the feces has hit the fan, and it just is tough to crawl out of bed. What is it that drives you on those days?
This is going to sound like a boring response, but my kids. I mean, they're so inspirational to me, and I want to be an inspiration to them. And they've been incredible in letting me be real. And I think the Lyme disease really was, it was a hard moment for all of us, because all of a sudden someone that they perceived as strong and sort of infallible became sort of weak and fragile. But they've been incredible in supporting the work that I do. My son and I are launching a podcast together. Doing things like that have just made life worth it. I think, it's hard, when you've got teenagers, they're going different directions and they've got their own minds and own will to do different things. But taking a moment to connect with them is definitely one of the greatest gifts for me that keeps me going.
Mm-hmm. Leaders, people who are committed to growth. What are you still working on in your own life? Not just but in your life.
In my life, I would say, actually, I had a great mentor who recently pointed out to me that I was addicted to chaos. And And that struck me kind of hard, but that's something that after my break this summer, I'm working very hard to remove some of the chaos from my life and from my work specifically. And I would say that's really my biggest weakness, is that I'm kind of addicted to chaos, and I'm trying to remove that.
Thank you for sharing that with us, because I think that is a very common addiction, particularly in entrepreneurs. Is if it's not chaotic, nothing's happening, right? And it's like, well, I've only got 3 balls in the air. I should have a dozen. I mean, yeah. I know. I just went through this myself very recently, where I was like, I woke up in the night having an anxiety attack, and I was like, what the hell's going on? And I said, I can't do all these things. And she's like, well, what is it? So I got up at like 3 o'clock in the morning and just grabbed my phone, went into the room, got my phone, and wrote the list of the active opportunities, meaning these are opportunity pieces I'm working on. And there's 9. Right. So I next morning I get up and get onto a meeting with several of my mentors and go, I've got these 9. And they're all like, yeah, they're all great opportunities. How many of them are you working on? I go, 9. They go, do you have 9 heads? No. Do you have 9 bodies? No. Okay. So we know you can do incredible things, and we know you're extraordinary at doing things, but nobody can do 9. So pick 3. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh my God, 3? Only 3?
It's hard.
I'm being lazy. 3?
Yes.
But the truth is, you're not effective, and it's exactly what we've been talking about. It's another distraction. It's another device. Only the device is an opportunity. And it was really interesting for me, because one of the things that one of my mentors said to me was, how many of these opportunities have to be today? And I went, oh, well, I've made them all urgent. Yeah, I bet you have. Okay, good. And so, I had to get on the phone with my friends in Europe and my friends in different places and say, listen, I really want to do this with you. I just can't do it right now. Oh, great. I said, you're free to do it with anybody else you want. Oh, no, I want to do it with you. Oh, okay. So you're willing to wait till the spring? Yep. Are you willing to wait till next fall? Yep. Okay, good. Yeah. I thank you for so much for sharing that, because I think that's such an important message for people to get. It really is. So as we come towards the end of the show, let me ask you, what is your guilty pleasure?
Ooh, my guilty pleasure. I would say a really nice añejo.
Oh, yeah, baby. A good añejo tequila.
That's my guilty pleasure. After a long day, I love a good sipping tequila. Oh, yeah, I would say that's my guilty pleasure.
Well, I am so with you on that one. Any particular one?
Fortaleza.
Oh, I don't know that one.
Oh, you got to try it. It's good.
I like Don Julio 1942. It's very good. I'm now enjoying Casa Amigos.
Casa Amigos, yep.
I'm very surprised. I thought it was going to be terrible because it was a celebrity tequila, but the añejo is very nice, rather delicious. I am definitely an añejo tequila drinker. So
I'm up for a tequila tasting with you next time.
Not breakfast. Thank you so much for being on with us, Heidi, today. It has been fabulous. Please tell our viewers, our listeners, where they can find out more about you and all your resources and ways to tap into what it is you're doing.
Sure. If they're looking for my research, it's at ForbesOste.com, just my last name. And my products, services, books, podcast, all that is on 2balanceu.com. That's the number 2, balance, BALANCE, letter U.com. And my podcast is Evolving Digital Self. And that's available everywhere podcasts are streamed.
And we'll make sure that all of those are up. And again, if you're listening, I just want to get, as I said, I'll make sure it's posted, but it's www.ForbesOste.com. Right? That's the one that might be a bit of a challenge, but don't worry. Like I said, we'll make sure it's in the show notes for you to get. Heidi, I really want to thank you for being with us today. Thank you for all that you've shared. It's been a pleasure and honor. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, Stowe. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome.
See you later, Dov.
And for everybody else, remember, you can chat about this episode by or previous episodes that you listen to by going to Facebook and finding our group in there, Dove Baron Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. And remember, the research consistently shows that one of the biggest challenges facing even the most successful companies can be somewhat counterintuitive in these fast-growing companies often hit a point where they realize they're spending a fortune training, attracting, and developing talent only to have them leave at an alarming rate. If you're sick of investing in training and developing your talent only to have them leave before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide you with the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, providing the concrete soft skills to get you and your organization to the top and keep you there. Why? Well, because you can't outsource authenticity. And remember, you can also stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need a www. Just matrix like the movie, .fullmontyleadership.com to get my authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. It gets a way for you to assess yourself in the 5 areas of leadership. It's valued at $197. It's absolutely free to you. Remember, you can find us on Alexa, and you can also find us on Google Play. Just simply say, play Dove Baron Podcast. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can create harmony with who you are as a human being and technology. Running away from it and being afraid of it will never solve anything in your life, and certainly not in technology. You have to become the master. You have to pay attention to you and what it is you're doing. Technology is there to help us, not to hinder us. So be cautious, pay attention, create a level of awareness, and be present. I'm Dove Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your life, in your business, in your leadership impact. And I am out.